And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you happen to tune into this incredible dialogue. And I'm so grateful to be joined by the two men that I have looked up to for some time. My name is Patrick Lovell. I am the producer of a five-part document series that you can see at www.thecon.tv that reveals a lot of what these two gentlemen have allowed us insight into that have had an incredible career that reveals what a lot of us need to wrap our heads around, hence the whole purpose of this dialogue. To introduce them, I'll start with Paul Pelletier. He was a white collar defense involved with a white collar defense practice. He's currently involved a legal consultant and principal of Pep Talk Advisors. And he was also a candidate for the U.S. Congress in the Virginia's 10th Congressional District. He previously was a partner at Pepper Hamilton LLP and represented public and private companies, executives of high-profile individuals from various industries and state and federal investigations, including healthcare, pharmaceutical, biotechnology, medical device, and financial services. He has experience in matters alleging international bribery, fraud, and corruption. And he's adjunct professor at George Washington University of Law, teaching courses on international money laundering, corruption, and terrorism. William K. Black is an associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the distinguished scholar in residence for financial regulation at the University of Minnesota Law School. He's a white-collar criminologist and was executive director of the Institute for Fraud Prevention. He taught previously at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas and at Santa Clara, where he was also a distinguished scholar in residence for insurance law, as well as being a visiting scholar at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics. He was a litigation director of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, deputy director of FISLIC, SVP of General Counsel of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and a senior deputy chief counsel, Office of Thrift Supervision. Suffice to say, between the two, we've got about as powerhouse of a group of incredible, experienced professionals within our system to help further an understanding of this incredible time period that we're in. And I wanted to just open up the dialogue with you two gentlemen today to try to set the table, because since you guys have been around for so long and you've seen just about all there is to see, I'm just wondering, and I guess I'll ask the question first to Paul and then to you, Bill. You know, when you've gone through the money laundering and the drug stuff that you had a front row seat to in the 80s, and La Cosa Nostra and all of that, and then Bill, of course, the savings and loan crisis and the amount of incredible corruption that you dug deeply into to hold over 1,700 white collar executives to account, and everything that's happened in between. It just seems to me today, and unfortunately, I got to say what I just saw right before I actually pushed record on this. There was a mass shooting at a Super Bowl party for the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know if you two were aware of that, but it's just another sort of revelation of a society in turmoil that I continue to think stems completely from what it feels like our institutions, our country, all of those things that we once just, I guess, took for granted as being stable and doing the things that we expect the government and our institutions to do, to something quite different, particularly in light of all things Donald Trump. Does it feel different to you, Paul, than it did back in the 80s, or is it maybe kind of more of the same? I'm not sure.
Well, first of all, I hope it feels different than the 80s, because we're in a new time and era. But yeah, it feels different. Look, I'm not in the Department of Justice now, and I haven't been for it's almost 15 years now. But I think where we are today, and I think Bill probably feels generally the same way, is that the great financial crisis sort of broke things, right? And our inability to tackle the crime, which a lot of us call the crime of the century, our inability to deal with that crime sort of broke a lot of things. And what it broke a lot is it broke a lot of people's trust, in my view, in the government's ability to deal with problems. And the people who were on the shit end of the stick were the people who were victimized by the predatory lending, right? And it was millions and millions of people who lost a lot of money. And to me, that polarized a lot of people. It created the situation where government didn't work for people, and the only people who were made whole seemed to be the banks by the government. So I think a lot of people just lost their faith in government, and they migrated towards candidates like Donald Trump, who were going to do things differently, and Bernie, who was going to do things differently. And those are the people that America sort of migrated to in that period of 2016 to 18. I think obviously the Obama administration had a lot to do with that. But anyway, my view is that's when the system broke, and we're still in the throes of the fallout of that. At least that's my back of the envelope view as to where we are now. And I'd be interested in hearing Bill's views, but I imagine that they're similar to mine.
Bill, I think it just seems so much more monumental now as a result of what Paul just demonstrated. But I am curious, when you were in the midst of it, because it must have been huge, when you were in the midst of the turmoil of the savings and loan crisis, I just keep wondering, am I seeing things incorrectly? Is this just what has to happen from time to time? I mean, because there's always going to be criminals and there's going to be guys trying to stop it, but is it different now?
Oh yeah, it's considerably different. And I think that Paul agrees with what I'm about to say. Yes, we displayed an inability to enforce justice in the great financial crisis, and tens of millions of people had their lives really disrupted, and many of their kids' lives disrupted. But it wasn't just an inability, it was an unwillingness to prosecute, right? We knew, this is the tragedy, we knew how to prosecute. We knew how to have a regulatory crackdown, right? We had demonstrated that in the savings and loan debacle, where you're starting from, in some ways, next to nothing in terms of actual structure. Lots of potential, but next to nothing in terms of actual structure. There weren't even criminal referrals at the beginning of the savings and loan crisis, right? We, working with the Justice Department, had to create a criminal referral system for the financial industry. Then we had to work together to create these task forces, because you couldn't just have a random prosecutor here, there, and have any effective response to something like the savings and loan debacle or the Enron era frauds that Paul is one of the world's experts on as well, right? So we learned, and it took years of effort and, incredible struggles within the system to create this system that got better and better through, in jargon, continuous improvement, right? You do the criminal referrals, you take them to the Justice Department, you get feedback. Well, that's great. You thought you were helping us, but you left this and this out, and this other stuff, we didn't understand what it meant. And so we retrain people, we do it better, we edit better, we make it more user-friendly. We have lots of sticky on and, say, hey, for this, go to this page. And then there's a sticky on that page that says, here's the key doc, here's the why it's a key doc, here's what this jargon means, here's why it's important, right? All those kinds of things. And then over time in the task force, the FBI special agents and the assistant U.S. attorneys, and sometimes Main Justice, get better and better at understanding and prosecuting these cases. And they use what we call rifle shot prosecutions in many cases to be able to deal with a high volume and target the absolute worst folks, and what we call making law, right? So we're developing precedent along the way. So they took what had been done in the savings and loan debacle and the banking crisis as well. People tend to forget that one of the 1980s, and built on it in Enron, where we were dealing with much larger corporations, right? So Enron was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history, except that WorldCom came within 18 months, in fact, less than that, and became the nation's largest bankruptcy in history. So these are difficult cases, but we showed how to do it. And bluntly, here's the good news: America's capacity to do this exceeds the rest of the world combined, right? And that all that knowledge, many of the people were available in the great financial crisis. And I'll turn it over to Paul for waiting for go instead of Godot.
So Patrick, as we move into today, Bill's right. All those models we created in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, up through the Enron scandals, which Bill again said, it's an iterative process where you're training, you're learning, and you're figuring out how to tackle these frauds together. And I remember standing up courses at the National Advocacy Center about accounting, because prosecutors generally are not accountants, right? So we would teach basic 101 accounting because the Enron type crimes were all accounting based. And so as you go through this process of training and learning and back and forth, that's the model, right? You do it. Now, the crimes, so there's two types of crimes, right? There's general white collar crime, and then there's these industry crimes that, either the savings and loan scandal, the Enron scandals, and the great financial crisis. But those are every 10-year crimes, right? But in the meantime, you're tackling economic crimes, and you're training prosecutors all the time how to deal with these type of crimes. And in order to do that, it takes leadership. And I will tell you, and I know Bill agrees, that the Department of Justice has suffered for many, many years now on a lack of effective leadership. And what do I mean by that? I think there's a great misallocation of resources. When Bill talks about us having the capacity 10 times over than the rest of the world, we do. But the resources aren't allocated where the crimes are. I'll give you an example. So when we started the healthcare fraud strike forces, first in Miami, then we brought them to Washington, D.C., and now we've placed them all around the country. What we were doing is teaching prosecutors how to tackle healthcare fraud, but using data. Because remember, healthcare fraud is a unique thing, because guess who houses all the data? Medicare. So the government is uniquely in control of all the data as it relates to billing and healthcare fraud. And so this is something we sort of figured out and worked out in Miami, brought it to Washington, and wanted to create strike forces around the country. Now, this is all organic. It's not like someone in leadership is telling us how to do this. And Lord knows if you ever wait for that to happen, it's never going to happen. So we looked around the country, and every U.S. attorney's office in the country was getting what we call Kennedy-Kassenbaum money. Kennedy-Kassenbaum money was money dedicated to every U.S. attorney to tackle healthcare fraud. 50% of the offices in the country had, when we looked in 2007, had zero healthcare fraud prosecutions. But they all received Kennedy-Kassenbaum money. And what were they doing with that? Nothing. The resources were not allocated appropriately. So we taught through these strike forces. Bill talked about strike forces and task forces. That's sort of the only way to tackle this uniquely broad American crime. And we taught prosecutors how to look at the data, and agents how to look at the data to to find the crimes, right? So we're being proactive on where the crimes just by simply looking at the data. It's really simple once you figure out how to do it. And so we went all across America and all the hot spots. And now I think we have 15 strike forces around the country where we taught prosecutors to do it. And they were kicking and screaming that the U.S. Attorney's Office, we know how to do this already. We don't need the help. Right now, Dallas, for instance, Northern District of Texas, they kicked and screamed and wouldn't allow our task force in for a number of years. Oh, we got it covered. We got it. Don't worry about it. We got it. Finally, they let us in. Our strike forces are now doing 50% of all of the cases in Northern District of Texas. 50% are all healthcare strike force cases because they didn't know how to do it, despite the fact that they said they did. So it's a misallocation of resources because nobody is forcing them to allocate resources correctly. And it is not rocket science. First of all, you need training to figure it out, obviously, but the way to do it and the way I used to do it is I'd go to every U.S. Attorney's office and the first thing I'd do is read their press releases. And by reading their press releases, you knew that all of their resources were misallocated because they weren't prosecuting shit. You knew where the crimes were and you knew what they were prosecuting. And it takes leadership to fix that. And in a white collar world where data mining might be the answer, it might not be the answer, you really need the focus of somebody who understands and knows what they're doing. And in most of these offices, they don't have that. Anyway, that's my 2 cents about allocation of resources.
Well, it's interesting because in a recent conversation we had with Bill had emphasized the point of resources, particularly from the Department of Justice. I had brought up the question of the civil fraud trial of Trump with the New York AG's office and all things which parallel what we learned in the con, particularly the control fraud methodology and appraisal fraud and all the rest of it. And it was interesting because, I was thinking it through that lens because Bill had been saying it would have been a lot more appropriate for the Department of Justice. And I guess there's a lot of semantics and details of why it was in the AG's office. But if the resources of the Department of Justice were utilized in the appropriate way that you've just laid out, it seems like a lot more high level convictions would be taking place more often. And to that point, Bill, it was really interesting. I had a recent conversation with Mark Dan. As you recall, we showed in the con the white collar task force that they had to do with state budgets because federal didn't come in to, of course, get that RICO conviction of a middle-level player that seemed to demonstrate a lot of the elements of what was taking place on Wall Street. But they just recently did it again, Bill, because of what happened yesterday in the bribery case with First Energy. I don't know if you happen to see that on the front page of the New York Times, but it brings back that idea that I hope that you guys can both speak to about because we know that the Department of Justice was once, I'd say, bulletproof. It seems like it was the ultimate in America law enforcement jurisprudence. And I'll finish this idea with this point. Yesterday, Ari Melber of MSNBC had interviewed Eric Holder, and he brought up the question of why didn't Holder's Justice Department do a better job at holding, and he just made all sorts of inferences without the details, of course, of what you have taught us, what we reveal in the con and that sort of thing. And so he just takes this basic answer from Eric Holder, who says, well, the idea is that, he kind of went back to that too big to fail argument that, you have to make the choices of, is there going to be a larger, consequence by prosecuting than not. That's kind of what he demonstrated. But further to that, there was another point he talked about resources, and he kept saying, if I could have, done more, I would have. And I kept thinking to myself, this is the Attorney General of the United States, the most powerful, institution in the United States. And it sounds like, anyway, I've said enough. Bill, can you pick up with that concept about resources?
Sure. And by way of background, my wife and I were both Justice Department attorneys as well for a time in the federal programs branch of the Civil Division. And that branch was created because of misallocation of cases, right? That the whole defense, that office specializes in the defending the constitutionality and statutory authority for major federal statutes, laws, regulation programs, that kind of thing. And those cases under decades of Department of Justice leadership were farmed out randomly to wherever the lawsuit was filed in, roughly 60 plus offices of U.S. attorneys across the nation.
93.
Yeah. And, and frankly, in that era, if you were doing civil in a U.S. attorney's office, that meant the leadership didn't respect you.
Nope.
So you would have these really major programs being defended by people who didn't know anything about administrative law and were at least considered by their bosses to be among the worst attorneys in the office. So we're very used to thinking, as Paul has explained, in these institutional fashions where you're almost always trying to succeed despite the Attorney General of the United States of America, not because of the Attorney General, and indeed more precisely, it's actually the deputy at the Justice Department for weird institutional reasons who sort of really runs stuff. So I was one of the leading trainers in the savings and loan debacle of U.S. attorneys and FBI agents. And as Paul is saying, the training was actually superb, I would say. I don't mean me. I mean the training effort and the people putting it together. First, they understood training had to be an immense priority, and that's absolutely critical. Second, they had to, I can't probably get across, but Paul and I are trying to, how weird the culture is that you have to navigate to try to get things done, and how many minefields there are that you wouldn't know existed unless you knew this world. So the people doing the training don't have power, really, and they have to be very clever and tenacious about getting this done. So, again, much praise to these people. But what did they want me training, assistant U.S. attorneys and prosecutors and what we call main justice? Banking. They wanted somebody to explain what the hell banking was, what honest banking looked like, and therefore what dishonest banking looked like. If you see these things, it's not because of banking, it's because of fraud. And as Paul said, that meant I was also giving an introduction to the critical aspects of accounting in this sphere, because these frauds are overwhelmingly accounting driven and use accounting as their weapon as well. Okay. And you get a very mixed reaction when you start this training process. I mean, especially all these FBI special agents, you walk in, they open up their briefcases, their gun is sitting there and such. And they're going, what the hell are you talking about accounting? And after all, the FBI, traditionally, that's one of the three major sources of people they hire in the old days, right? Accountants, lawyers, and law enforcement were the big three. And even with that, it was difficult to get as special agents, there are no non-special agents in the FBI, to listen to accounting, especially if they knew accounting, right? Because they had some general stuff, but it's very specialized in whatever sphere you're prosecuting. And you really have to learn the ins and outs of that. So it's almost harder in many cases if they have an accounting degree on all of this. Then the other thing I'll just say really briefly is we had to embarrass the Attorney General of the United States of America into prosecuting the savings and loan cases. They refused to prosecute these cases, essentially. They didn't create task forces. And so we made public every month how many criminal referrals we'd made. And the Washington Post started every month publishing, hey, there are now 6,000. So we end up with over 30,000 criminal referrals, right? And it got super embarrassing for the Justice Department. The Attorney General personally, not the DAG, as we call the person who runs the day-to-day stuff, the Attorney General personally met with the new head of the agency, and he's only there because we blow the whistle and get our old head of the agency, how shall we say this, embarrassed into, he got the statement by the president that he had lost confidence in the leadership, right? That's code in the federal government for you will resign, and you will resign immediately. So we finally got, by blowing up our leadership, which was in league with the crooks, and then embarrassing the Attorney General of the United States of America. And he came over and he had a brilliant idea, because he couldn't do, obviously, anywhere remotely like 30,000 criminal referrals. He created the top 100 list with us. It was a serious process, a good process to go through of here's why my case should be one of the top 100 priorities. So when I say a top 100, there are really 600 defendants in those cases. And so that was a win-win strategy for the Department of Justice and for the agency. And what they quickly discovered was that task forces were essential. And then they also discovered having our examiners, what we call detailed to the Department of Justice. So I won't go through there's 6E stuff about what can be shared with us, the regulators, once you go to a grand jury process. And we're the internal experts that you're drawing on as the assistant U.S. attorney to do your case. So once you went to grand jury, you were cut off from us, at least in substantial part. So we would detail, which meant we would pay the freight as our regulator agency, but you would be taking your orders as one of our employees from the assistant U.S. attorney or the main justice prosecutor. And that has other subtle advantages because you can be present at counsel table in these circumstances where you're both an expert and a fact witness potentially. At least many judges would permit this. And so you otherwise, as a prosecutor, you get hit with all this jargon from their alleged expert and such. And it's very difficult to understand even what they're talking about. But our examiner could say, no. He's saying A, B, C, and all three of them are bullshit. And here's why they're bullshit. And indeed, he's fallen into a trap. And now you can pull the thing we talked about yesterday on him and pull the rug out from under him. And it's going to be great type of stuff. So these are very unusual things. They don't happen in the rest of the world because we can do plea deals, which most of the rest of the world doesn't do, or at least doesn't do it remotely effectively. We can flip witnesses to a vastly greater extent than the rest of the world. And the grand jury in the hands of a very competent and diligent prosecutor with lots of support in the mechanics from FBI special agents. These are folks like Paul are concert level in their ability to do these things and then to simplify the case enough and just enough to be able to explain to a lay jury an aspect of this ultra complicated cases. And I think what Paul will tell you, it's because we simplify it. We're not talking about an ultra thing. We're talking about stealing money or some variant of the phrase. Now, turn to Paul.
Well, let me just set this up with a caveat, but I do want to comment on that real quick. I always say my phrase, my shortcut is it's not rocket science, it's racketeering, and in a lot of these things that we've been revealing. And Paul, when I was watching Holder yesterday, there was two things that he said that I forgot to mention. He said that first and foremost, DOJ is a lot more politicized than it once was. And that was an interesting sort of like insertion of like, yeah, DOJ is no longer kind of like the bulletproof, by the law, everything. I don't know why he would say that to Ari this many years later, but he was trying to acknowledge a lot of stuff that I guess happened during the Trump administration, of course. But of course, we know what happened, and you with the front row with Holder. But then the other thing that he happened to mention was the it was another big piece of it. It was resources. It was politicization of the DOJ, and then that he had said that some of the efforts that he made were written. He just inferred it, obviously, into Dodd-Frank by way of incentive for whistleblowers to receive, a compensation for their testimony in big cases, high-level cases. Can you kind of address all of these types of these things in the mix?
In 2 minutes.
So first of all, I'd rather the department be politicized than imbecilized. And I think that to a large degree, the way he explains it is sort of an imbecilic way to explain it, right? So if there are, and I'll give you an example. So when I was going after AIGFP and Joe Cassano, which I wasn't allowed to do, which preceded my departure from the Department of Justice, what they didn't understand, and I didn't meet with Eric Holder, I was meeting with Lanny Brewer and his fantastic crew, and what they didn't understand is what Bill just said, and that is, while this may seem complicated, and credit default swaps and all that, all those financial shenanigans are very complicated. But who gives a shit? Because it all boils down to, were they lying, cheating, or deceiving, right? Were they doing any of that? And if they're lying, if they're cheating and they're deceiving, it doesn't matter what a credit default swap is or what the quants say about this particular problem. So what I was trying to do was break it down in a way that you could show that Joe Cassano absolutely fucking knew that this accounting that he was doing for these credit default swaps was hokum. And we could prove that in a number of ways based upon what he did to people and how he treated people. But they couldn't get that through their head. And what Lanny kept saying is, we can't afford to lose these cases, which is just absolute batshit crazy. So Eric Holder didn't know how to build the model, didn't care about building the model, didn't ask about building the model. So Eric Holder was part of the problem. All right. So, but let's go a couple of steps forward. You heard Bill talk about how deft you have to be to navigate all these traps to get results. And there are not a lot of people in the department, a lot of people in the regulatory industry. There's not a lot of people that definitely can figure out how to get to square D from square A and convince a bunch of political people along the way to move in that direction. And one of the ways you do it is through embarrassment. What we would do in the healthcare industry is, in the healthcare strike forces, we would send to the U.S. attorney, who would refuse to let our strike force in, the stats about the billions of dollars that were being stolen from taxpayers in his district, from healthcare taxpayers in his district for the last 6 months. We'd send them the stats. This is all bullshit. This is all false billing, billions of dollars. So ultimately, it is sometimes through embarrassment. But let's just fast forward today, because I do want to answer your question about sort of, and I know I'm all over the place here, it's hard to thread this needle, but I want to talk about whistleblowers, because I do think that given where we are in the Department of Justice, assuming it's not a great financial crisis, how do you tackle white collar fraud that's going on, high level white collar fraud, right? And the more the Department of Justice becomes unable to figure out how to do this, you have to rely on whistleblowers to bring that stuff in the door. Think about where the big white collar cases are being brought right now. New York, either Southern District or Eastern District, or Main Justice Fraud Section. That's it. That's it. What the fuck the rest of the country is doing, I have no idea. But we see nothing. We see nothing in terms of an organized tackling of significant white collar fraud. And so what it's dependent upon is whistleblowers coming in, private industry, lawyers culling whistleblowers, bringing them in and using that as a way, as an intro into the crime. The government's not figuring out how to tackle these crimes for a whole bunch of reasons. Part of it being they're not allocating the resources correctly, part of it because they're not training people correctly, part of it because there's not the political leadership or will that is forcing the issue. So I think Eric is kind of right and it's a little bit silly that they're almost becoming wholly dependent on whistleblowers as opposed to creating systems, which we've talked about before, Patrick, having a Manhattan Project to sort of, let's tackle this type of money laundering. Let's take this type of fraud. How are we going to do it? What systems are we going to put in place? So rather than doing that, which is the tough work, the easy work is culling whistleblowers and using them to make your cases. And, way back when I was doing drug cases in Miami, you had the agents who would work with cooperators, and that's how they would make their cases. And you'd have the agents that would do wiretaps, and that's how they made their cases. And so my point is it takes everything. It takes a full use of your resources and toolbox in order to tackle effectively these crimes. And when you're relying upon just one methodology across the country, and that's whistleblowers, that becomes a problem. But I think that's sort of going to be the wave of the future, because I don't see the department tackling this on a systemic basis.
Well, like most Americans, I grew up, watching television shows that demonstrated a lot of that stuff. So when I went through the 2008 great financial crisis, I just assumed all of that was happening behind the scenes. And it took me going on this multi-year journey to learn through you guys, what wasn't happening. And the remaining time, Bill, and I know you were ready to comment on that, but I'm just going to quickly insert this question. The nature of financial fraud today and the way businesses are incentivized always marries what you've taught us the whole time. It's the Gresham's dynamic. When you get rid of the accountability and you incentivize and you reward this, insane behavior, you're going to get a downward spiral, which seems like post 2008, that's even gotten worse. And that's what you guys said at the opening of this dialogue. It's even worse now than ever before. Obviously, millions of people are concerned about Trump. Maybe you can, through the rest of this dialogue, maybe demonstrate, what the level of threat assessment, maybe starting with Trump. But I know from what we've done this whole time is at best he's a mid-level player. He's a real threat, but he's not the stuff that you guys have been revealing to us for a very long time, who are monumental. And so what does America need to hear and understand? We know that you guys can fix it. We know that that it requires critical will, but it requires understanding what's real. But if, for example, you did have tens of millions of people that understood what we continue to try to reveal to them, what is the fix, guys?
Okay, so the first thing is Paul talked about building up to deal with it. We've gone the opposite direction, and we've gone the opposite direction at three ways. First, in the whole field of finance, we have eliminated the criminal referral system. There were almost no whistleblowers in the savings and loan debacle producing the criminal referrals. but there were thousands of examiners in the field who found the evidence, like the Trump fraud case in New York, right? Scam appraisals, et cetera, that these actually constitute crimes, both a substantive crime and because you are making a false statement to a federal official, the examiners, for the purpose of deceiving them. That's a separate crime. In fact, it can be multiple crimes depending on how you do it, right? And those tend to be cleaner cases in some ways to do these things. So not only did Holder inherit a system in which the criminal referral system that had been the superb, highly developed through continuous improvement system, but it had been entirely eliminated and eliminated secretly, right? I don't mean it was a conspiracy. I mean, I can't find anything that by which they order an end to the criminal referral system, but it's removed from the examination protocols and things like that. And there are simply no more referrals. So, the estimate we heard from Chris Swecker is he thinks there were 6 total criminal referrals from the agencies in the great financial crisis, which was massively greater than the savings and loan crisis, where just in the little S&L industry, we had over 30,000 criminal referrals. So here's the bigger point. Holder didn't recreate it. What would be among the very first things you would do? Recreate the criminal referral system and make it a huge priority. And nobody subsequent has done that. Second thing, 9/11. We transfer very large numbers of special agents. It's complicated how we do it, so getting a precise number gets funky, but we dramatically reduce the capacity of the white collar section of the FBI to go after these cases. Not only were the numbers reduced, but they were transferring them, and FBI transformed the entire agency into an anti-terrorism agency. All right, that's literally jobs 1 through 9 in their priority system now. 10 is everything else. I think 7 within 10 is financial, to give you an idea. But they also transferred the people they thought were the absolute best at following the money. And that phrase isn't just something you see in movies. We actually do follow the money, right? To find and make many of these prosecutions. Again, moving the money, accepting the money is often proof of not just a civil and administrative wrong that we, the regulators, can deal with, but something we'll make a criminal referral on, because it also represents often multiple felonies. And again, often cleaner cases where you can flip somebody in the chain and get killer testimony at a top person, right? So we have everybody understands why they transferred folks and why they changed priorities, but you could have a bigger FBI, right? And you could do more. And none of them have even tried to do that in any substantial fashion. Look back to the savings and loan debacle. As soon as the savings and loan debacle occurs, we hire hundreds of new special agents and we get new funding. Why? Because we made it a massive priority legislatively to get those things done. So that's the second. And the third is what we're talking about, but also skating around. Leadership. It isn't just that the leadership of the Department of Justice has often been, frankly, pretty weak. It's gotten worse. And it's gotten much, much worse under Trump. And this latest thing, I mean, one of the things you just do not do as a United States prosecutor, and one of the reasons people like me, who are sort of weirdly hopeful about life, have loved the aspects of the Department of Justice is that line at the bottom of every indictment that these are just charges and you are presumed innocent, and that you don't put into the press release something like, well, we talked to this guy and he seemed kind of senile to me, and so this is what that's bullshit, right? You do not do that as a Department of Justice attorney. And it's not just in the criminal realm. We didn't do it in the civil realm either. You had responsibilities that went beyond legal canons of ethics to not being assholes, at least in your pleadings as well. And that's outrageous.
Certainly, Bill, as it relates to uncharged people.
Yes. Yes. That's what I'm referring to.
Well,
people you're supposedly clearing.
Right. Who can't defend themselves at all.
Yes. It's out. I mean, it's just, I can't tell you as an ex-Justice Department attorney how much it makes my stomach sick.
Well, you know who had to sign off on that report? Merrick Garland.
And that's where, I mean, if you want the guy that has made it a race to the wire as to whether there will be a prosecution, that's entirely the guy who decided not to blow the starter whistle for 2 years.
Right.
I want to tee you up on this one, Paul, because I can kind of sense what you might say, but I want to try to get this in before we close. First of all, I was so honored to be able to engage with you two and learn from your incredible experience and your courage and your principles and what I always interpret is just the basics of Americana, particularly at the level of which you two gentlemen served. But you had written, Paul, well, actually, you and your colleagues, I'd like to call the group of people that came together because of the kind, that included a bipartisan situation because of Chris Swecker, who is, of course, Republican. You guys wrote an op-ed that basically demonstrated what eventually, Paul, it seemed like you picked up on because you wrote a fantastic article called The Manhattan Project to address all of these things in the Atlantic, obviously one of the most established and respected news, magazines in the country. And all things Trump seems to have been like he could have gotten indicted and criminally convicted years and years ago, maybe even decades ago. But here we are,
definitely decades ago.
Yeah, decades ago. So what we're talking about just spans the prism, and you ultimately land on Merrick Garland at the AG of this country, and it's like it's hard for me to rationalize knowing what I do, but what about for the American people? Can you talk about the lack of leadership, just to tee it up and remind where I'm trying to go with this, as it relates to the current DOJ, given what Bill just revealed, of course, running the wire out, right? Donald Trump should have been convicted years ago. And then ultimately, once again, the question of resources. If tens of millions of people understood exactly what's been going on for decades that got us into this situation, what do we got to do if we can get critical mass to you guys to fix this problem?
Well,
can I just do 15 seconds first? Can I just do 15 seconds first?
Absolutely.
What Paul has been telling you with the medical cases, the health cases, what I've been telling you in finance, we haven't closed the loop. We are enormous money makers.
Oh, right.
There is no resource limitation.
Right.
We would have vastly more resources if we prosecuted the crooks. Sorry, Paul.
No, you 100%. So I guess I don't want to just put it. I think I 100% agree with Bill about sort of Merrick Garland's performance since he's been in there. But the malaise has been in the department for a while. And I want to give you one example because I think it leads directly to Trump. So you folks might remember, and I've always used this as sort of a launching pad for my anger. Well, one of the principal bad guys in the the great financial crisis in the bad mortgage crisis was Angelo Milla. And if you remember, he was being investigated by the Central District of California. And they let him, and I put this on Eric Holder's shoulders and the U.S. Attorney's shoulders, they literally agreed not to prosecute that guy, and he did a civil settlement. So think of what that message is to both prosecutors and other people. That you have this guy who was one of the few devil incarnates in the great financial crisis, does a SEC settlement, and if you read the facts of that settlement, it screamed criminal behavior. And then you had the U.S. attorney say, okay, we're done. We're not going to prosecute you. We're going to give you effectively immunity, but we're going to lay off you. We're going to agree not to prosecute you. That's Central District of California. I think the message that sends. So then fast forward only a couple years, and we have Trump University. And Trump University is being investigated in the Central District of California. And again, those are the cases that most prosecutors in the past would criminally prosecute. Why? Because they were stealing money from people. It was a classic fucking theft scheme where they were selling absolute snake oil. And they pretended that was a civil case. It was not a civil case. They were stealing money from people by lying, cheating, and deceiving and promising things they had never had any desire to come through on or perform on. And Trump was part of that process. They had him on videotape saying he was going to do things that he never, ever had any intention to do and never did. And they treated that as a civil case. And I look at the thread through Mozilla, through Central District of California, laissez-faire attitude about these very, very serious crimes. And I wonder what the hell you were doing not prosecuting these cases criminally. And so I think you've set the table that that's okay. And I don't think that dynamic has changed since then.
Well, Bill always taught us that the lowest ROI is on a corrupt politician. That obviously in the era of Citizens United is certainly a huge return on investment. And Bill, let's give you the final word on this, because it really does bring, us to everything you've ever taught us. And my mind's just swimming with all of the different elements. But again, Trump, to me, is such a reflection of all the failures of everything that he's like a red carpet to understand. The government is demonstrating through the 91 indictments and, the descriptions of defrauding the United States and using deceptive acts and practices and racketeering and all of these things that come in all of these different cases. That's what our financial system has gotten away with, to the tunes of trillions of dollars. And again, I continue to see the incentive, the Gresham's dynamic, the control fraud, all of these elements, it's so easy when you understand the methodology of what you've taught us, and you begin to see the patterns in everything, whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, whether it's, pensioners and all of those types of things, which again, just comes down to what Paul just says outright. Are they lying, thieving, and deceiving on a monumental scale, which is now still in contention for the presidency? This is not America. And like you said, the resources, go ahead.
So we've both been telling you another story implicitly that I'll end by making explicit. And I'll give you an analog. I did an anti-corruption gig for the World Bank in India. And I won't explain the mechanism we use to spot a particular kind of fraud, because we still use it. But the people, the corrupt folks that are scamming, in this case, medical supplies in India from poor people, so, the scum of the earth, they could have easily avoided detection by spending literally $5 more. And what I got emphasized to my colleagues at the World Bank was, this is telling us that they think it's not worth $5 to hide what they're doing. That's where we're approaching in America. What you're seeing is billionaire after billionaire after billionaire saying the quiet part out loud and laughing about it and saying, yeah, you got a problem with it? Well, I'll just take over Twitter on free speech grounds and ban all the honest people and fill it with maggots, right? Just absolute scum of the earth. Like, they're not just racist, but it's just one bunko scam after another, right?
Yep.
Tens of thousands per hour going out, at least, probably hundreds of thousands. Actually, viewership is down so much, maybe it's only tens of thousands type of thing. That's how bad the system is. And then link it with what I said. This isn't a matter of lacking resources. We would make and we would save so many billions of dollars for the public. And it would be a massively popular thing for any president to do. Why the hell didn't, yes, we can blame Holder, I do, but who appointed him? Who could have gotten rid of him at any time? Who made no effort to prosecute and instead invited Jamie Dimon? How many times did we put together in the con?
Yeah, it was.
And negotiate personally with him as if he was the good guy? I mean, again, these are things that it's not that we haven't built up to deal with the frauds. We have torn down and torn down and torn down. And you can see from their behavior, they now have no fear of prosecution. And when you have no fear of prosecution in the billionaire class, I mean the real billionaires, not Trump, the phony billionaire, right? I'm talking about the really powerful folks.
Yep.
They do not fear us in the least. Let me give you the scale of the great financial crisis. Just the GDP loss, just in the United States, the present value of that is 41.7 trillion with a T. A trillion is 1,000 billion dollars, according to a very conservative economist, not an anti-fraud type. He's not talking about fraud at all. He's just estimating how much productivity lost. And that's before you get to the 10 plus million direct victims that Paul and I have talked about many times. And yes, the disproportionate targeting of Blacks and Hispanics, such that college-educated Hispanic families over the course of the great financial crisis lose on average 70% of their wealth, and Blacks 63%. I mean, these are staggering losses for the nation, staggering losses for the people they consider most vulnerable to predation, but there's no excuse. We would make God-smiling tens of billions of dollars more if we prosecuted, and we would prevent trillions of dollars in losses if we prosecuted, and we still cannot get the political will from either party to do, and this is I think our ending lesson, we know how to succeed. We are uniquely positioned in America still because of DOJ's somnolent capacity, because we can flip witnesses, and because we have more whistleblowers than the rest of the world combined. We can take advantages of those things, and it would be immensely popular for any elected official who led that effort. And none of them are running on that basis. None of them are doing these obvious things that we know work, that we proved they worked, that were destroyed and could be fixed, and they would make tens of billions of dollars net. Actually, hundreds of billions of dollars.
And the other side of the equation that we haven't discussed, but we can save it for another time, is of course the media's failure to actually do its job. Because without that, and that's where I am. And I promise you guys, and I know you've seen me relentless about this, and I will not stop. I will not stop, because the two of you and the others inspire me to no end. And we're going to get this message to the tens of millions of people that need to hear it. And I hope you guys will continue to join me as we build this audience in these further revelations, because the deeper and deeper we get into this trap of everything that we're in the midst of, the further we get away with something that is so easy, as you guys have demonstrated. Easy
is the wrong word.
It's not easy.
Not easy, but doable.
Anybody who tells you it's easy is lying.
I'm sorry.
Or doesn't know the process.
We have professionals that have demonstrated know how to do it, and you can do it again, and you get the right guys, and it's the right stuff. That's what America is made of, is the right stuff. And we just have to get over this madness of lies and the stupidity of, like you promote in social media and Elon Musk and everything else in the context of mainstream media. Whatever. I've said enough. That's all I got to say. Anybody want to add one closing comment until the next time? Go ahead.
Paul illustrates that the fourth advantage I didn't talk about, how many Americans are willing to have their career, at least in a field, end to do the right thing.
Courage. Character, which we all thought we had at one point. You guys obviously do. So you know what? That's a mess.
All of us would do it again.
Yep.
Without hesitation.
Sure. And it's because of our experience and faith in the system.
You guys make me so proud to know you. Thank you. I hope we get it. Please like and subscribe. Please share. Get this message out. There's more to come. Guys, again, as always, thank you for your time. We're gonna prevail. We're gonna triumph. We're gonna get this out there. It's not necessary to hope, to persevere. Thank you, guys. Onwards and upwards. That's all. I'll be in touch soon. Be well.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you both.